As I mentioned, Ken, is a colleague of ours and has come in and taught or lectured for this class that we've done in the past. He's a graduate from the School of Global Policy and Strategy here at UCSD. Did you do undergraduate here or just?
I did.
Oh,
yeah.
So he's going to tell you about that, and I'll just turn over to Ken so I don't mess it up.
All right, thank you.
And does he need this one too?
No, thanks.
This one?
No.
Not that one.
Just see whether we can hear you okay.
Can you guys hear me okay? Oh, good. I hate carrying that thing around. I have like American Idol, nightmares or something. Well, I guess it's the voice now, right? No one watches American Idol anymore. Hey, it's great to be here. And I actually think I used to study in this classroom way back when we were trying to find a quiet place to study. I think I used to sit right over there. It just was like a flashback that just came to me when I saw the cork on the walls. UCSD had cork on every wall when I was here, along with wood paneling and all sorts of things. It was a long time ago. It's great to be in an entrepreneurial class here. When I went to undergrad here, this was a place you came to get a PhD. And the closest you could get to any practical degree was managerial economics, probably, which was very theoretical still. So it's great to see UCSD delving into the practical art form of business and entrepreneurship. Curious to see how many here are undergrads. Could you just tell me? And grad students? Non-students? A few? Oh, quite a few. Cool. So, and how many of you have an entrepreneur that's bubbling up inside of you, just like really needs to come out? Okay. All right. Well, hopefully this class won't dissuade you from that. It's great you're doing the Lean Canvas. I run an organization called Mission Edge, which I'll talk about a little bit. We're actually running an accelerator right now for nonprofits using the Lean Business Model Canvas to develop earned revenue models. So as you know, the nonprofit world, which I work in now, has a very difficult business model in that you do a lot of good in the community and then you go out and beg people for money, and that's your revenue model. And boy, it's a tough way to make a living, I'll tell you. For every Red Cross, there are 100 small organizations that are just struggling to make payroll month to month. So one of the things we're trying to do is teach nonprofits to figure out whether they can earn revenue through their activities and then limit the amount that they have to spend on donations and fundraising. I like to start with a quote here. It's actually cutting off the attribution. It's Peter Drucker. Best way to predict the future is to create it. I like this quote in particular when I talk to nonprofit groups because I often think nonprofits are really good at reacting to the world and not as good at proactively solving problems. And so what we try to do is get them to think more proactively about how can they use the forces of the market to actually solve social problems. So I'm gonna, we'll see if this works or not, but I'm gonna talk a little bit about my own story. I did this last time I talked to Greg's group, and I think it resonated a little bit, how I got here, working in the nonprofit space. So I left GPS and immediately started a company in an area that I knew absolutely nothing about. It was in healthcare and technology, two things I knew absolutely nothing about. And I learned a lot through that process. I ran the company for 6 years, went through a bankruptcy, reorganized, kind of went through the whole sort of boom and bust cycle, and found two things that I think really resonated with me for the future, which is that, one, you really need to do something that you really care about. Healthcare was interesting to me. Certainly, I think it's great to help people. I wasn't in love with the healthcare market. I think I got anxious to do something, so I just picked the first thing that came along. I had a friend in college who also didn't know anything about healthcare. My two co-founders, we were all like deer in the headlights, right? I had no idea what we were doing. But his dad was a radiologist, so we thought, okay, well, somebody in the family knows something about healthcare, so we're gonna do that. And we raised a bunch of money, brought a product to market, only to find that the product that we developed was not the right fit for the market that we were trying trying to sell into. We thought it was the right fit, but the problem was that unlike the lean business model, Canvas, and the lean startup sort of thing, we didn't fail fast. We failed excruciatingly slowly. We developed a product for like 2 years, and we did focus groups and thought we were asking the right questions of the right people. But by the time we actually brought the product to market, we found out that the market had shifted, and the people that we were asking the questions of weren't actually the right people we should have been talking to, because they weren't the actual check signers. So I learned a lot about not sticking with things too long. I tend to be, overly determined to finish things that I start, and so that probably didn't help me in that case. But I really learned a very painful lesson that you really have to continually be asking questions and continually talking to your customers. I know you guys are sort of going through that now with this lean business model and customer validation piece, which frankly is not enjoyable, right? I mean, we're doing this right now with nonprofits. They hate, I mean, it's weird, but they hate talking to their customers or prospective customers. And part of it's that they don't want to hear bad news. Part of it's that they feel like they're taking their time. Part of it's that they don't know what to ask. It's a whole litany of things. But it is crucially, it's a crucially important step that if you avoid, you end up doing what I did, which is spending like $5 million of other people's money only to find that we built something that no one wanted. And that was a painful thing to get over. But it actually taught me a tremendous amount that I've used in the rest of my career. I started a couple other companies after that. Another one in healthcare, which in the dental space, which I also didn't know much about, but learned very quickly. And then I did a lot of stuff in the high-tech consulting world. And one day in 2010, I had what I call an epiphany. My wife calls it a midlife crisis. I prefer not to use that term. And I realized that I didn't like what I was doing anymore. Kind of really like in a fundamental way. Like I actually hated what I was doing. And I was trying to I was making good money and I had 25 or 30 employees around the country and we were doing well. And I tell you, it was tough. And I got up one day and realized I have to quit. I can't do this anymore. Like I'm looking in the mirror and realizing the time is going by. I mean, it's a very common story probably for a lot of people. I talked to a lot of people who are in their mid to late 40s and they're having this kind of discussion with themselves about, okay, what am I doing and what am I going to do for the next 20 years? Because the next 20 years are the most important 20 years because it's the last 20 years of my working life. So actually, I don't even know that's true. I'll probably work till the day I die. But practically speaking, it was an important kind of conversation for me to have. And fortunately, my wife knew more about how much I hated it maybe than I did. And she said, "Oh my God, I've been waiting for you to say that. Let's call right now. Let's do this right now, today." I'm like, well, it doesn't really work that way. I've got stock. I've got to figure this out. So over 6 months, I extricated myself. And I woke up one day without a job for the first time in a long time and trying to resist the inclination to start something else, because that's kind of what I always do. And I actually had to get a coach to help tell me to not do more, but to actually do less and to really just take some time and figure out what do you really want to do. And I went back to GPS and talked to a friend of mine who is still there working there. She's gone now. And she said, well, what are your passions? And I swear to God, deer in the headlight, I had no answer for her. I said, my son, I like my son a lot, but I really didn't know. I mean, and it was kind of it was weird because I think when my dad had all sorts of passions, and I don't know, I like fixing my house. Is that really a passion? I don't really know. So it was kind of a weird position to be in. And I realized I needed to get out and try to figure out what would really make me want to get out of bed in the morning and feel good about what I was doing. Not that making money isn't good or employing people isn't good, those are all great things, and I did plenty of that, but I was looking for something more personally that I could look at and say, hey, you're going to work today and you're going to do something that's actually meaningful to the community and not just build another data warehouse for a big company. And so I took time off. I actually did take time off. Then I joined an organization called Social Venture Partners, which is really a fancy title for just a bunch of business people who volunteer, get together, put some money in a kitty, and then they put money to work in the social sector into nonprofits, and then they give a lot of time. So you do a lot of volunteer work. And so during that period, I found that I had a passion for helping veterans in the military. So I started doing all sorts of volunteer work. I was on the board, national board of a veteran service organization, and I really found a calling for helping veterans. It was kind of like what made me go. And that was a big part of, that was a big part of what I sort of see now as kind of my own like golden circle. I don't know if you guys, this is kind of neat. It's by Simon Sinek, who you guys, a lot of millennials know because he's a speaker. He's got a lot of stuff on YouTube. I think it's just a brilliant way of kind of talking about what is your why. Like, why are you here? A lot of people can talk about what they do. A lot of people can talk about how they do it. Like, you're a doctor, you're a surgeon. How do you do that? You go to the hospital, you go to the operating room, you fix people. And maybe a surgeon has a better idea why they do it than other people, but I know that I didn't have a really good understanding of what my why was. Frankly, it's kind of funny, but my parents, who are in their 80s, you know, they could never understand the first two, actually. And finally, my mom, when I talked about my mom a couple days ago, and she said again for like the 10th time that, you know, somebody asked me what you do, and I still tell them that you work for the CIA, right? So, because she can't explain it. So it's just better if she just says, oh yeah, we can't talk about it. He's deep undercover. Deep undercover in San Diego. Yeah, exactly. So I think this is really worth looking at personally, and particularly when you think about what kind of organization you want to start. He makes the point that this is something that Apple in particular has just nailed, right? And he goes through this example of, you know, you talk to IBM, what does IBM do? IBM makes personal computers. How do they do it? They design them really well, and they make them, and they work really well. And why do they do it? They do it because people need spreadsheets, right? That's like IBM. I mean, maybe he's picking on IBM. And Apple, you know, everything Apple does is to make the world a different place. Like, think different, like, you know, revolutionize the world. And it comes through, I think, in their products. Like, I know you, those of you who have Apple products, like when it comes in the box, you know, you sort of sit it down and you just look at it, you know, and it's just so beautiful the way it's packaged, and you open it up and everything fits together perfectly, and it's like, it's an experience just unboxing it. And one of the things I noticed recently is that everyone else's packaging has come up a notch now. Like, you buy any product now, high-tech product, it's got a lot of Apple in it. Because they want you to have an emotional connection with what they're selling. It's not just it's not a phone. It's a communication device that changes your life. So I like this for lots of reasons, and when you do start a company, I think it's great to go through this exercise with your co-founders and really try to come to some value consensus on why you're doing what you're doing. Most partnerships, and I've had enough of them that have gone bad, go bad at some point because your values start diverging, and your needs diverge, and your goals diverge. And so one person wants to sell out quick, the other person wants to run a company for the next 10 years, and suddenly you've got this massive conflict. This is no guarantee that that's still not going to happen, but it's good to do it and then to do it continually through your relationship with your co-founders. All right, so I'm here to talk a little bit about social enterprise. What is social enterprise? Does anybody know what social enterprise is? And don't feel bad, there are like 16 different answers and they're all right. But can I get one of the 16? Does anybody have an idea?
Trying to do something for like an altruistic reason other than just profit. Trying to make the
Yeah, that's good. Try to do something for altruistic reasons, not just profit.
From the class that I learned, it's like putting the social cost into the business model.
Okay.
Using the revenue to directly solve the issue.
Very good. Awesome. Yes, so that's right as well. So I like this definition. To address a basic unmet need or solve a social problem through a market-driven approach. So he kind of sits in between what they call traditional business and traditional nonprofit. I actually think that 5 years from now, this slide's going to be, wrong, because I think there's traditional businesses. There is no such thing as traditional business anymore. I think it's shifting, and you guys are a big reason why it's shifting. Although I'm pointing at you like you're all millennials, but I'll just give you a blanket. Some of you, I'm going to reduce your age right now. So be happy about it. That you guys really care about where your products and services come from and what the company that delivers them is doing for the world, right? I mean, studies have clearly shown that you're willing to spend more to buy products and services from companies that you believe in are socially responsible. So that's not what I grew up with. For sure. The whole idea of corporate social responsibility, like big companies using shareholder money to improve the community. I mean, I know a lot of people who think that they shouldn't be doing that at all. I think it's good business, so I think they should be doing it. But the world is shifting, and you guys are right on the cusp of, I think, a change in how people look at solving social problems. And thank God, can I just tell you, because nonprofits are not solving social problems. They really aren't. I mean, I work in that field now. Mission Edge, I should talk about a little bit about what Mission Edge does. I think I missed that part. So we're basically a capacity building organization for nonprofits. I got out of Social Venture Partners and realized that there were lots of nonprofits that had the potential to do a lot of good work and had really great founders and super capable program people, and they knew everything about this topic, but they couldn't run their company. Like they didn't know how to do it. It wasn't what they should be doing. They weren't interested in doing it. No one wanted to pay for it. They didn't want to do accounting. They didn't care about, employment law. I mean, they care about it, but they didn't understand it, and they were just hoping that no one would find out, It's like the duck and cover kind of approach. And so we found that operational things were really getting in the way of a lot of these organizations doing good in the community. So we thought, well, this is something I understand, and I've run services businesses before, so let's start a nonprofit to help these other nonprofits with their back office support. And it kind of started out with just that idea. So we did it, it was classic outsourcing model. I found a guy who was actually still on my board. Really nice guys, retired CPA, CFO. His wife said, don't come home, during the day. You got to find something to do. Play golf. We need you to get out of the house. So he said, I'll go and I'll work for you, and you can send me into these nonprofits and I'll help them figure out how to become more operationally sophisticated and sustainable. So that's kind of how we started, and that was 6 years ago. And then since then we've grown to do full HR, leadership development, coaching, executive search. We have an incubator program where we take startups, nonprofits, and we help them develop their model. We do this accelerator. We also have a skilled volunteer program with Qualcomm and a couple other companies where we bring skilled volunteers into the sector to do pro bono work. All of which is to say, that all came about because I thought making them more operationally effective would help them do better in the community, and they are doing better in the community, and I don't want to say for a second they're not. We certainly are helping them be more effective. But the model itself, this whole notion that you can ever raise enough charitable money to solve these intractable problems is just not realistic. And I think if you look at the nature of some of our worst problems in the community, from homelessness to hunger, to challenges around recidivism and things. I mean, I don't know that we've made much progress in the last 40 years, and yet we keep plowing money into this model that I think is gradually shifting because you guys Thank God, and I'm so happy. You're not coming out of UCSD thinking, I'm going to start a nonprofit. I'm going to start a nonprofit where I'm going to pay myself half of what I'd make in the private sector, and then hire a bunch of people and pay them a half of what they make in the private sector, and then go out around and beg for money. Thank you for not doing that ahead of time. I don't want to see any of you start a nonprofit. I know I say that. I've gotten criticism for saying that too strongly. I don't want to step on your altruistic goals and dreams. Start a for-profit that makes money, and then give that money back to the community or do something with those proceeds that will help society. So much better. So anyway, social enterprise. We're back to social enterprise. So social enterprise focuses on, what I think you alluded to, which is kind of a double bottom line, right? You make money while you also positively impact society. So it's profit and purpose. Now some people talk about a triple bottom line. You guys know what the third bottom line is? Another P. Profit, purpose, planet. So they talk about how do you have profit, make purpose, and help the planet at the same time. That's a super radically large goal. So I prefer not to talk about the last P, because if you do the first two, and enough of you do it, it will help the planet. So what are some social enterprise models? So Mission Edge is a social enterprise. So we are a nonprofit, but we derive 90% of our budget. It's like 1.6 million last year in services revenue from our fees. And then we get a little bit of money from Qualcomm and some money from some other donors for some programs that we do, but our overhead is primarily fee supported. Solo Eyewear started at San Diego State, really cool company. They sell eyeglasses, and then they do vision work in Central America and help kids who have vision challenges. Tom's Shoes, that's Tom at the top. You guys know Tom's Shoes? The one-to-one, buy one, give one away. Goodwill, you guys have heard of Goodwill? Massive social enterprise. They do all their programming through the money they make in their Goodwill stores. Girl Scouts cookies. Every time you see a Girl Scout selling cookies, they're supporting a social enterprise. And so you should buy them. I buy them and I don't even eat them, but my wife and son do, so. All right, so I wanted to make this a little bit more tangible. I wanted to do a little case study. It's a little organization called City Heights Coffeehouse. Does anybody know City Heights Coffeehouse? It's a tiny little coffee cart in a what is it, like off an alley in a little outdoor area in the middle of City Heights. And they actually just got the lease for their first storefront. So they're opening up their first storefront. It's a husband and wife who started a nonprofit with the idea of brewing coffee in a community of where there was no real, what they felt like authentic coffee houses. So I don't know if you guys know City Heights. It's a very economically disadvantaged area in the mid-city. I think there was a Starbucks nearby, but they realized that Starbucks wasn't really their demographic. And so they wanted to create a coffee house that would reflect the culture that they were working in. And they also wanted to provide employment to marginalized groups and sort of live an ethos of social change. This is a little frustrating, but so this just talks about the need, the highest residents with barriers to employment. So there are a lot of refugees, a lot of recently incarcerated, a lot of folks that have tough challenges with getting back into the workforce. So basically what they did is they started this little social enterprise model where they brew and sell coffee, and they would put marginalized folks that have been having a hard time getting back in the workforce to work in an on-the-job training, kind of a workforce development program. And so they pay their people to come and work in the Coffeehouse. They provide life development classes. They help them with career support. They provide mentorship. And they also produce 65% of their budget from their product sales, and they raise 35% of their budget from philanthropy. Just a little sort of 2070 impact. I mean, it's not huge. It's a very small organization that's working on expanding. But they hired and graduated 5 employees. So they put 5 people through their work training program. They administered employee development programs. They gave away 100 copies per month via Pay It Forward. So someone comes in and says, I want to buy a coffee for someone who can't afford it. And they sort of pay it forward for the next person who comes in who can't afford a coffee. And they did a bunch of community development activities. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. But here's a question that I get a lot. I'll ask you, although it's kind of a rhetorical question. How do you balance profit and purpose? So a lot of times what I find is that we'll get startups that come in who have a real idea for their social impact that they want to do. And they're all wrapped around how they're going to change the world, but they don't focus so much about how their product or service is going to actually play in the marketplace. And then I have sometimes the opposite, where you have folks come in who really understand the business side, and they're really looking around for a social thing because they think it's going to help them with their marketing. So I often say to them, it might help you with your marketing in the short term, but if you're not living it, it's not going to be authentic and it won't work in the long run. So you really have to really think what it is that you're doing and why. So this is a great little, kind of hard to, next time I'm going to bring the regular slides, but there are two bottom lines, but they are not equal. Without profit, purpose is meaningless. So what we do is we just continue to drum in to the minds of the people we work with. Purpose will not happen if you're not in business. And in fact, we say that to our nonprofit customers all the time. You know, people still have this notion that nonprofit means you don't make profit. First of all, nonprofit is the worst term in the history of the world. It is. It's so bad. It's so destructive. It's so non-descriptive. And actually, profit in Latin means progress. So it's actually non-progress. Let's not make progress. I mean, the whole thing is crazy. But and the reason why it's so damaging is because it puts in people's minds that, hey, you're not supposed to make money. You're doing this out of the goodness of your heart, and you shouldn't spend anything on anything that isn't related to the programs. And that's why everyone wants to give you grants and donations that say, I want to feed the puppies. I don't care about the person who does it. I don't care about the roof that's over there. I don't care about paying your electricity. I want it to go to the puppies. And so what happens is you get this sort of notion that we're not supposed to make money. We're not supposed to have money left over at the end of the year. And we're supposed to be living at a break-even level. Well, if you're at a break-even level, likely you're not in business. And so we spend a lot of time trying to disabuse people the notion that we shouldn't have a surplus at the end of the year. And I think, how do you start January if you don't have any money in the bank? So you got to have the profit piece. Even if you do, like, and I won't be mad, but even if you do go start a nonprofit tomorrow or next week or whatever, you have to have profit. You can't just have purpose. So your first priority is your business model. You guys are learning about this now with the lean canvas. How do you make money? What do you do? What do you do that the market needs and that customers are willing to pay for? And can you deliver it in a profitable, sustainable way? You know, when we started Mission Edge, okay, first of all, full disclosure, I can say that I didn't know about the lean canvas when I started Mission Edge. Probably isn't totally true. It's maybe a little bit true. It was probably brand new right then. I did not use the lean business model canvas when I started Mission Edge. I mean, we made all the mistakes I'm telling you guys not to make. We underpriced our services. We took on the wrong clients. We said yes to everybody who would work with us. And we basically weren't thinking much about the profit piece. And I had the nonprofit mindset. So I hadn't been violently disabused of this notion that I could do this and just do it for the good of the community. So I've learned a lot. And we almost toppled over a couple times. Matter of fact, one time I thought our reputation had taken such a hit, I didn't know whether we'd recover or not. And so we got very serious about profit, and I put on my for-profit hat, and I hired people who understood the idea of what margin was. Like, I had people that I hired in the beginning, and they didn't really know. I mean, they knew what margin was because a lot of them are accountants, but they had no idea how it applied to them. And now I've got a staff that is so hardcore on it that sometimes I'm the one that's like trying to pull them back and say, well, you know, and they all look at me like I'm the softie now because I come in and say, well, I really like what they're doing, and can't we like help them out? And they're like, no, this doesn't make us money. We can't do this. And they're right, really, because too many charitable activities and suddenly we'd be underwater again. So we weren't able to deliver our model very profitably in the beginning until we figured out the process that really needed to happen so we could spend not too much time at every client, but just enough. And all of those things we learned the hard way. And I think that in a lot of ways, no matter what your lean business model canvas tells you, you're going to learn a lot when you get in business. It's not going to tell you everything. It's going to give you a set of assumptions to work with, and you're going to find that a lot of the stuff you thought was right wasn't right. The company I have right now? Yeah. There's not much difference, really. I mean, I think if we did, there's a good reason for us to be a nonprofit because we do something called fiscal sponsorship. So we actually allow other charitable projects to work as a charity under our 501c3, and we handle their bank account. We allow them, we give them legal status. So you have to be a 501c3 to do that. But I often tell people we would not have started out as a nonprofit. Well, no, I can't even say that, and I'm going to tell you why I can't say that. Here's the other thing that I realized very quickly is that we could switch to a for-profit now and probably be okay. When we started, nonprofits wanted to work with us because we were a nonprofit, which is another thing that I sort of, I'm challenged by, let's put it that way. Because there's this chasm between the sectors. Like if you're for-profit, as Greg was laughing about, you know, you're a capitalist, you know, and you're out to, you know, make money, evil person trying to make money, you know, and they're there for the good of the community, and they're working on crappy secondhand furniture and sitting in some hovel in Kearny Mesa. I mean, you know, and I'm not making light of it. I mean, everyone, they try hard to pinch pennies. I'm not actually, but I'm just saying it's symbolic of this sort of scarcity mentality, right? And so if we were for profit, they would have looked at us like, you know, you don't get us, and you're in it for money, and we don't want to work with you. So we had to be a nonprofit from that standpoint. Now I think we have enough of a reputation that I don't think anybody would know or care. But in the beginning, but we act like a business, I mean, for all intents and purposes. But we had to because no one was going to give us money for anything. And so the other piece of this that I learned very quickly is that we made some assumptions in our non-existent, in our fantasy lean canvas model that we didn't do, that we would get subsidy from funders to provide these services to the community, because funders had to believe that good accounting and good infrastructure and good operations is important to nonprofits, and it will make their money go further because they'll be more efficient. And so we were convinced of that in the beginning, only to find out that, not really. They don't want to fund operations or overhead or anything that is any of the stuff that we do. So we had I had another epiphany midway through that we either had to be a business or we had to go out of business. And I was actually okay about going out of business. If the market didn't want us, then I didn't think we should be there. But I decided to give enough chance to see if we could figure out a rate structure that we could actually make money at and not rely on subsidy, and it's kind of worked. It's definitely hard, but it's worked. Does that answer your question? Any other questions before I move on? All right, so a little bit what I want to talk about, and I'm going to come back to the City Heights Coffeehouse, is talking about impact model. So it's really about your business model, and it's about your impact model. What is your, what they call, and this is a kind of a nonprofit term, what is your theory of change? Right? What are you trying to change in the community through the operation of your organization? And how will you do it? So when you think about theory of change, it's kind of a very, it feels like a very theoretical term, which it is, it's a theory. And a lot of times people say, oh, you know, my theory of change is to end hunger. And so I often say, well, you know, you're going to work really hard and you're very talented, but you're probably not going to end hunger. You're probably not going to end homelessness. So how do you think about it more in terms of something that is actually measurable and demonstrable so that you can tell people who will give you money that you've actually accomplished what it is that you're set out to do? I'm going to have to do this in two because this is kind of important. So City Heights Coffeehouse's theory of change is that by selling coffee while providing on-the-job training opportunities for underserved adults, we help them become more employable and self-sufficient. So they're not saying, hey, we're going to make City Heights into La Jolla. They're saying, you know, we're going to do our little business and we are going to help these adults become more employable and self-sufficient. So here's why I like this theory of change and why I wanted to sort of talk about it tonight. It's clearly connected to their business model, right? They sell coffee for a profit and they employ people to make it for the customers. It's measurable where they're training their employees in the business to make them more employable, and they can be measured by number of employees hired and trained, number of employees who move on to new jobs, number of employees who get off public assistance programs. So those are their measurements. So when someone comes and says, well, how do I know you're actually, so what's your social impact model and how do I know you're actually meeting it? Well, they have something that they actually can put in a spreadsheet and say, well, we've had X number of people come through out of the X. We've had, 95% get jobs in the community and they're all gainfully employed, and because of that, we've had 45% of them get off public assistance or whatever. This is actually harder. It's probably harder to do than it looks. I mean, I think it's super clean. I think a lot of nonprofits struggle with not their theory of change, because they all have good theories of change because they raise money on it, but they tend to struggle a little bit about the measurement, because a lot of people say, well, how do I measure things that are hard to quantify? It's like there are some things that nonprofits do and that social impact organizations do that are hard to put a number on. And so a lot of times you look for things like proxies to say, well, you can't really measure happiness, but you can measure certain dimensions of their life that would theoretically lead them to be more happy, and sort of try to figure out ways of doing it that way. So my question to you guys to think about is, what's your theory of change? I mean, if you guys have an interest in being a social entrepreneur, and I'm not saying you should do that, but if it is something that is important to you and animates you and is part of your why, then you need to build it into your business model and really understand what you're trying to change. And it doesn't have to be big, it can be small. It can be small and meaningful. And actually, I think that, when we talk about raising money from investors, I think it's important to have it be aspirational, but not crazy. Because I look at pro formas from companies that I may invest in or whatever, and their business model, and I want it to be big enough so that it's interesting, and I want their logic to be right, but I don't want them to be actually trying to sell me that they are the next Facebook. Because I don't know how realistic that is. It's not realistic, let's put it that way. Particularly if it's a social network, I don't want to see a social network at all. So, so it's important to have it be aspirational, and you want to be able to connect with the people who are interested in your social change area, because they're super passionate about it. But you want to also be able to say, hey, I want to be able to show that if you give me money, I'm going to move the needle. It's not going to be the big needle, but it's going to be a needle here, and we're going to actually make progress. I think that's all I have from the presentation, but I'm happy to answer questions. Yeah?
So, we are aspiring to bring this social good, okay? How about profits? We are non-for-profit organization, but how about those companies that are solely focused on profits, who are very powerful, specifically here in California, who don't want us to innovate in a social sense because they know that it's better, just to yield profits, I'm talking, for example, about affordable housing. It's definitely an issue here in California, and if I come up with an idea that will, enable people to get housing very quickly and in a very efficient and cheap way, nobody will let me do this. And I believe that there are many cases when, the profit sector just prevents us from innovation, social innovation. My question is, whether you have ever faced such situations, and how we can counter them.
Yeah. Well, that may have been true historically. There's something called impact investing, which is kind of a new market for for-profit investors, where they're looking for financial return and social return, and it's a really growing area of investment. And so you do have impact investment funds now being run by all the big investment banks and money managers that are looking for opportunities to move the social needle, but also they want to get some return. It may be a reduced return, but things like affordable housing are perfect markets for that kind of thing. And actually there's an impact investment group in town called Mission Driven Finance, who the founder was my co-founder with Mission Edge. And they are just put their first $1 million to work doing things like you just said. And in fact, they just signed a deal with Habitat for Humanity to fund the building of Habitat for Humanity homes with a return when those homes are sold. So it's actually happening. It's just not, it's going to have to happen with a different vehicle than the traditional for-profit funds. Yeah. Anybody else?
Do you see these impact investing firms interested in local impact?
Oh, there's another topic. Well, San Diego, I've done business here for a long time, and this is a great market, but it's not a great market for certain things. And it tends to be a small market relative to Los Angeles, even Orange County and San Francisco, in terms of the funding that's available. So you have some impact investment that's happening here. Mission Driven Finance is all focused on local investing, but most of the big players, they don't come to San Diego really. They haven't been as focused on the San Diego market. That's true in nonprofit funding also. The big funders in the nonprofit world, the Ford Foundations and the Rockefellers, and they do almost nothing here. Zuckerberg. They just San Diego's we're to be seen and not heard, I guess. I don't know. And Greg will vouch. This has always been a hard market to raise money in for startups. When we raised our first $3 million round, my first company, we literally raised it from 65 individuals. It was hard. It took a long time. There just wasn't a lot of money at the time. There are not a lot of active venture companies here now who have active funds. It's just it's a hard market. I think if you're good, you can do it, but it's not like, and I don't think it's like this in the Bay Area either. I think that there's popular sort of view that, hey, you can go to like Pete's and write something on the back of the napkin and someone's going to hand you like $10 million or whatever. Like I don't think that really happens so much, but it makes for a good story. But we are challenged institutionally here in terms of money for that kind of stuff, and that's why mission-driven finance, their goal is to put $10 million to work in the next 2 years, which is not huge, but it would be a good start for us because they're locally sourced, and they've actually found that the big guys in New York have been coming and asking them what they're doing because it's an interesting model that other people want to copy. So I don't know, maybe there's hope for it. Who else?
Is there any good local social business?
Yeah, there are a number. I had Solo Eyewear up earlier. There was a gal who started at San Diego State, and you can look that up. There's a great company that we work with a lot called Kitchens for Good. And what they do is super interesting. They repurpose food that normally would get thrown out, like at grocery stores or whatever, and they bring it into a kitchen. They put people to work learning culinary arts, and they make meals and have a catering business using food that otherwise would have gone to waste. And they're doing great, and it's a great organization. And there are a lot of little ones, startup ones that haven't yet taken off. But it's a good question.
How do you differentiate between a business that's doing it for the marketing aspect and doing it for the social impact investment? I see a lot of them that talk about all the responsible things they're doing, and yet I read their ingredients and I shake my head
Yeah.
and realize that that's not responsible. I'm not going to put that in my body.
Yeah.
And maybe doing something they believe is responsible with profits, but I don't see the whole picture.
Yeah.
coming together.
Well, I think that's a really good question. I think about like Paul Newman's own. So I mean, Paul Newman has been fantastically philanthropic with the stuff that he's done, and there are a lot of products, food products, also that tout their social responsibility. Maybe it's from where they get their products, or they source stuff from organically grown farms where the chickens run free, or whatever. I don't know, whatever the story is. I think there's enough information now online that you can do your own research and find out whether they really walk the talk. And these tend to have movements around them, and people have checked it out. Stuff. So I always look at everything. I think everything's marketing, so I always look at everything skeptically until I've proven otherwise. And then maybe if it's good for you and you like it, maybe it doesn't really matter. So part of the question is like, how important is that to you as a consumer?
So, for example, Ellen Brown Scripps. So her family run a lot of newspapers that were all across small towns across the United States. Those profits were pulled to San Diego, where then she made investments.
Mm-hmm.
It looked great here, but the question that some of us asked, I've sent on some boards, said, what happened to those small towns? What were they doing? What type of, it was, something happened there, that money wasn't reinvested there, it was invested here. So like Seawall, started Scripps,
Right.
Mason Parks, did a lot
Right.
of other institutions.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I often think that we have the opposite problem. So we actually have a lot of people who've moved here who have roots elsewhere. So a lot of the philanthropic money that is actually in San Diego gets deployed back in their hometowns and where they grew up, as opposed to being deployed here in San Diego, right? So it all has to do, and this is kind of the thing that I realized after courting donors over a period of time. And finally I gave up, and I don't do that anymore, frankly. I mean, I'll honestly say I do not court donors for major gifts. It's just not something I'm interested in doing. But they want to put their money where their heart is. And if their heart is back in the Midwest, because that's where they went to grammar school, and they want to help, I mean, that's where it's going to go, no matter how good you are at selling your vision for what you want to do with the money here. And they may give you go away money, right? They may say, look, I'm going to write you a check for $5,000, so you just like stop pestering me. But it's not going to be the kind of money that they would put to work if they really had their roots here. And it's kind of a challenge. I mean, there's a ton of capital in San Diego. A lot of it doesn't get deployed the way it could if people had their roots here. Yeah.
I'm interested in this coffee shop business model, and I'm wondering if there's any way you could scale that sort of thing, or because I was kind of thinking about doing something similar, and if that business model would be scalable, or maybe franchise. I don't know if you could do a franchise, but where they could kind of share their model and
Yeah.
do it in other places.
That's a good question. I think the model itself is certainly transferable, but the beauty of what they've done, and I think it has to be, again, we talk about authenticity. It's connected to the community that they're working in. So if it popped up somewhere else and didn't have that kind of community roots, I don't know how successful it would necessarily be. But if you had somebody like this couple in another part of town, I've got, who says, hey, I've been working in this community for a long time, I've got a lot of connections, this really speaks to me, I think it could be set up there very easily. Now, keep in mind, it's a coffee shop, it's a coffee house, so you have to have realistic expectations of what kind of profit it's going to derive. But there is a beautiful thing about their model, which I think is it's a underappreciated component, which is this workforce development piece. There's lots of money, state money and federal money, for job training. So one of the things they were able to do is get a funder to pay for their employees to go through their training program. So the government paid the wages, they got the training, so it actually cost them nothing out of pocket. And then they were able to have them graduate and go on to something else. So if you can develop those workforce development relationships and you have a at-risk population or an underserved population that can get federal or state funding, there's a great funding mechanism there. Now, there's lots of hoops you have to jump through because it's the government, and so it requires a lot of a lot of detail and a lot of documentation and everything, but it can be worth it if you have that model. Yeah, it's interesting. I love what they're doing. If you guys ever go to City Heights, look it up and go there and buy their coffee. Sorry? I don't. It's on University Avenue somewhere in City Heights. I should know the address. Yeah, it's very long. I know. Maybe someone will Google it. What is it?
4465 University Ave.
4465 University Avenue. 4465. Yeah. And it's kind of it's off a little alley. There'll probably be a sign on the street that'll with an arrow, so you have to kind of go and look and find it.
How much one cup of coffee?
That's a good question. I don't know. It's probably yeah. I don't know. Let's look. Let's see. All right, the brewed coffee, $1.50.
What do you think about the B Corporation certification?
Oh, that's another great question. B Corporation I think it's fine for the following reason. I don't think at this point it gives you any marketing cachet because I don't think anybody really knows what it is. It means it's a for-benefit corp, so it's California designated another corporate status. You have C Corp, S Corp, and we have a benefit corp. And the one thing that I think it is interesting and good for, and I've had a couple of conversations with B Corp founders, and I asked them, why did you do that? It had a lot to do with their relationship with their shareholders, because it's the structure of the organization is that some of their proceeds is going to go to the community. It's like written. So you're not going to be in an argument with your shareholders about why are you giving 25% of our proceeds to the homeless when you should be giving it to me. And it kind of cuts off that conversation because you're investing in a B Corp because there is a social mission. So I think that structure is interesting and I think may have some value, but I don't think anybody knows what a for-benefit corporation is, so I'm not sure it's, and even a certified, which is a whole nother thing, which is like a certification on top of it. I don't know. Maybe someday it will be really worth doing, but I think it's interesting to do if you're going to be a for-profit with a clear social mission. It doesn't hurt to have that because it does give you some protection, liability protection, if you are really going to invest in the community.
They have seen that they wanted to create a movement by creating an awareness and then also adding education and a way for people to kind of learn how to sometimes turn existing businesses into for-benefit businesses. And it's caught on a lot more in other parts of the world than it actually has even here in California. In fact, one of the things they're doing now in the Americas is creating something called MOSFED, where they're going to certify entire cities as to their social responsibility, and looking how government and city infrastructure, provides for the welfare and offering the certification. So the concept is getting out there.
Yeah, and it's a movement that may catch on. So it may be 10 years from now, I mean, it may be a huge percentage of the companies that are being started.
Sometimes you see these tipping points where something just goes along like this and all of a sudden it just tips.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can't always explain kind of what caused the tip.
I have a question.
Sure.
What are some of the more impactful ways that you've seen something more elusive like happiness measured?
Yeah, I used to have a slide up here and I took it out. I wish I hadn't, about what they call proxies. So looking at certain soft measurements and then trying to figure out what components are linked to that. So if you say, I'm kind of making this up because I can't remember exactly what it said, but if you say happiness is related to having a good job, having a roof over your head, having your food on your table, let's say, and you can measure those things fairly tightly in terms of how many people are employed, how many people have have a roof over their head, how many people have food, and then you kind of extrapolate that. Well, those are the components that make you happy, right? So, that's not a really good example, but they've done work to kind of correlate certain emotional things that are hard to measure with actual physical measurable outcomes, and then try to link it together. And there's been a lot of studies that have been done, so that a lot of these are well documented, that they've done studies to say that happiness is related to these following 5 things. And so if you can measure these 5 things, more likely you're going to be happy.
Some of the research that I'm involved in is looking at a different approach to that. So for one, what they found is that happiness isn't necessarily the right index, because it depends on how you define it. But people say happiness is a very contextual state. It kind of moves up and down. The thing you really want to look for as a baseline is contentment, where people are just kind of very satisfied and grounded in what they're doing. They find that's a lot more sustainable. But one of the ways one of my colleagues had developed is a way of capturing micro-narratives, basically stories. And if you could listen to the way communities tell stories to each other, to the media, how people kind of listen to these, and then you're able to map all these stories, you can see not only how people feel about a place, but you can also understand intentionality and motivation. You can understand, because as human beings, we are natural storytellers. So when you ask people surveys or questions, you'll find out either what they do or don't do. But if you ask someone to tell you a story, you're going to find out why they're doing it or not doing it. And that's a really, really kind of compelling way of capturing kind of the zeitgeist of a place.
For something like that, how would you then put it into a report or something if you're doing fundraising?
So that's a very good question, because we're going to be doing some of those experiments here in San Diego. So this particular tool that was originally developed within the NSA as part of counterinsurgencies and counterintelligence has been turned into a commercial tool based on an Android and iOS app, where it's called mass ethnography, a way of capturing these. And it's able to plot them graphically in a very objectifiable and quantifiable way. And then when you look at the scatter plots of various stories, you can then say, well, how do we get more stories like these and perhaps fewer stories like these? And then as you introduce interesting experiments or interventions into the community, you can see how, because the plotting is dynamic, it's not static. So you can actually see how stories in a community move based on real-time events and what's going on. You can see also, do they begin propagating? In other words, do people then begin repeating them, and do other news stories begin pushing them forward, and do they have tropes and memes attached to them? So there's a whole science behind how you can look at how these things catch on. If you're interested, and
I am, I'll talk to you after the conference.
Is there a way to monetize that?
absolutely.
So are they looking at with crypto?
There's so many ways to actually look at it. We were doing a study, actually my colleague was doing a study in South America that I was working with them on. We wanted to understand people's attitudes about entrepreneurship, how people felt. Now, the traditional way of kind of capturing that is you say on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 7, how entrepreneurial do you think your community is or this institution is? And people would literally slide it. But the one thing about surveys and questionnaires is people seem to game or gift them. Because we think there's a pattern, we go, there's a right answer. We're gonna figure out the right answer, or I'm gonna gift them. I'm gonna give them the answer that they want. People do that all the time. What this does is it changes it into an abstraction. It says, if a friend of yours came to you with an idea for a new company they wanted to start, what advice would you give them? And what's interesting about that, it doesn't say what would you do, it's what would you advise would you give a third person. And what we find is that when you take the answers out of the personal self and have them talk about someone who's not in the room, people give much truer answers. So there's a way of structuring these kinds of tools to really understand, it's called sentiment analysis, and mass sense and culture scans. So there's a lot of science in terms of how to do these things in a very clever way. And we now have computational tools, computing power, you can measure these things at scale. You can measure 100,000 or 1 million of these things just as easily as you can manage 10.
That's cool.
And we're going to be running one of the projects here in San Diego as a result of social innovation.
That's awesome. I didn't know any of that. That's great. I love that. Any other questions or comments or thoughts? I didn't break your nonprofit spirit, did I?
No, on the contrary, I just wanted to say this is very enlightening. I've run it's becoming a nonprofit. I'm in the process of filing paperwork, but I've been running a nonprofit more or less for the last 5 years as a sole proprietorship.
Uh-huh.
And most people I've talked to have been very cautious about me filing for nonprofit status because they don't want me to not make any money.
Mm-hmm.
And I've tried to explain that exactly what you shared tonight, and people just really don't seem to have that notion of nonprofits, and it's very misleading.
Yeah.
Yes.
And by the way, not-for-profit doesn't mean if you do decide that, doesn't mean you can't make money. Just as for-profit doesn't necessarily mean greed and
Exactly.
and hoarding.
Exactly. It's just more about, as I see it, just showing your social impact.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm very interested in.
There have
showing
been
my
times though
impact.
when we found setting up a not-for-profit essential because a lot of the money that was coming in was
Yes.
foundational support,
Yes.
or the types of capital that had strings attached, where it had to go into an educational foundation
Yeah.
or into some kind of nonprofit.
So that's a really good point, and actually we've been doing setting up a lot of foundations for-profits. So there are a lot of hybrid, kind of dual models out there. We're actually doing one right now for IRA, which is a company that started out of Rady that does support for the vision impaired. They raised a huge round, and now they're going out because they have companies wanting to give them philanthropic money to put to work in the community, and they need some vehicle to take it. So what I often say, and I'm going to backtrack a little tiny bit, I often say, should you start a nonprofit? Depends on where the money's coming from. And if you have a startup and someone's willing to give you $100,000 as a donation, that's a good reason to start a nonprofit, right? Because that's money that you can use to prove your model. Maybe you eventually spin out a for-profit as well. and then maybe eventually the nonprofit goes away, whatever. But you can do both, and I often, counsel people to do both. It's more management challenge. It costs more. You've got to have dual everything. So there's an administrative burden to it, but it can be worth it if the money's there. Anything else? I know it's late, you guys. What time is it?
It's 7:20.
Oh.
I would say nonprofits can also be really big. I work at a nonprofit, Biocom, Life Science.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About 55 people.
Yeah,
Very revenue generating.
Yeah.
I run a program that generates 150 grand myself.
yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, you have the model, right? So
Yeah.
it's a membership model.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, we have.
Well, you got a lot
we
of
have
different things.
For-profit.
Yep.
As a purchasing group, we've got a 501c3 and a
Yep.
501c6.
Yep.
Veterans.
Yeah.
The whole
Yeah.
gamut of things.
Yeah. No, I mean, it really can work. And there are a lot of successful nonprofits in the community, and certainly if you really have the corner on a market and you own that market, then it can work. But if you're going to start another nonprofit in a sector that there already are lots of nonprofits, super challenging to differentiate yourself. Yeah.
I guess that leads to the next question. So I worked for a nonprofit that was also for profit as well. And I never really understood, and I still really don't, how, because I'm sure there's rules and regulations about how the money can go back and forth and how it can.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I mean,
It's not like you just-
yeah, so this is an area that we do a lot of consulting on because you can get in a lot of trouble really quickly as a for-profit by starting a nonprofit and then commingling funds and then using those funds for the benefit of the corporation. So really, it needs to be 100% separate. It has to have its own board, its own staff, its own bank accounts, and there really needs to be a fiduciary line between the two organizations. And so IRA actually is a good example. They're setting their foundation up initially as a fiscally sponsored project at Mission Edge because my board is actually the fiduciary that's responsible for it. And there's a very clear distinction between the company and the nonprofit. So eventually they may spin off a foundation, but it's going to have its own infrastructure. And the IRS, as you can imagine, doesn't take kindly to using the nonprofit as a tax shelter or any other kind of funny business that goes on. So it's really important that it's done very professionally and by the book, because you can open yourself up to a lot of liability. Yeah.
If I was set up a nonprofit, 501c3, I can get the form I do myself, or I need to hire a lawyer.
Yeah, that's a good question.
In other words, legal paperwork.
Yeah, so it depends on how big the organization is going to be. The IRS started a 501c3 easy kind of form for small. I think it's $50,000 and below.
Is that form from IRS, or I can get the form from the law library?
I don't know, maybe either. Certainly at irs.gov you probably can get the form.
You get it online.
Yeah.
Exactly, you can get online, you can Google it.
Yeah.
You'll find it.
If you're doing anything that has any kind of complexity, you may want to have an attorney do it, because when they evaluate it, there's going to be lots of questions, and so the more that you can.
In the business law section or the corporation section or the law one?
That's a good question. I don't know.
What was the question?
The business law section or the corporation section?
Of what?
In the law book, I think it's in the corporation section.
Yeah, it is in the corporation section. Yeah, because it's 501c section 3 of the tax. I think it's of the tax code.
Federal tax code,
Yeah.
not the state.
Well, the state has its own thing. You have to file with the state also. Yeah, you have to file with the state of California and with the federal government.
So there's two different.
Yeah, there's two different. Yeah.
And be prepared to wait a little while.
Yeah.
It's not nearly as quickly as filing for a traditional for-profit, because they want to make sure that the purpose, that everything is very much in line
Yeah.
with what it should be.
Yeah.
What are the minimum requirements for an organization to be considered a nonprofit?
because if they're making profit, where do you like draw the line?
Well, it all has to do with your mission and whether your mission is deemed to be for the benefit of the public and for the benefit of the community. So there are nonprofits that are one volunteer staff member that with a $5,000 a year budget that's doing something in the community that the IRS deems is worthy of a tax deductible status, tax exempt status. So it really is more about your mission and what you're trying to accomplish in the community. That's really what they look at. And they have a very wide view of what is beneficial to the community. So you will have some that are turned down, but generally, in our experience, if it's a reasonably charitable idea, you can get tax exempt status for it.
And if the main directive is like typically like making something that isn't meant for like the greater good or to help the community, but they are directly like taking their profits and like using them for something else right away, where can you say like, okay, this is really the main part of it and like not this? Or I guess that's for the IRS to generally.
Yeah, I'm not sure I 100% understand. So can you try that again?
Like for Tom's and like Goodwill and these companies you mentioned, which are offering like a service or a product essentially, but they're is also like helping the community. Is there a point when you can say, oh well, they're like making too much profit, or I don't know?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good question, and the answer is no. If the profit is related to the social activity that they're doing, so it's not unrelated income,
Right.
then you can generate tons of profit and still be a nonprofit.
So it should be related.
So it should be related. If it's not related, then maybe it should be a business, right? But I think that, so if you have unrelated business income, that you're going to get taxed on it, and if you have enough of that, the IRS is going to say, you're not a nonprofit, right? But you can make a lot of profit as a nonprofit if it's in service of your mission, and it all has to do with what you do with that profit. I mean, the profit ends up going back into the organization. It's not paid out to shareholders. There's not a dividend. I mean, yeah. So it really is for the benefit of the community. It goes back into the community, and then there are, because you guys have heard, the controversy over like the Wounded Warrior Project and the exorbitant salaries that they paid and the bonuses and all that stuff. So that there's like watchdogs, and that's why every financial report of any public charity is publicly available on the internet to see who gets paid what and what. I mean, it's all public knowledge in order to keep those things from happening. So if you really want to be private about how much money you make, don't start a nonprofit because everyone's going to know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, everyone's going to know.
And by the way, not-for-profit doesn't mean that people still don't earn. In fact, we see a lot of nonprofits where people get paid sometimes too good of salaries. So it doesn't necessarily equate to being poor or necessarily being overly thrifty, although
Yeah.
people would love to think about that because you have people you're responsible to, but it's not necessarily that way.
Yeah, and I would argue that it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be the way that you're asking people to take starvation wages, to work in the social sector. There's a great video TED Talk by Dan Pallotta, who wrote this book called Uncharitable. He ran the cancer walks and stuff and raised hundreds of millions of dollars for charity, and got in trouble because his fundraising costs were very high, and actually got fired because they were spending so much money. And he was arguing, well, if I'm making the pie this big, it's okay that I'm spending money to make money, but they want you to spend nothing and still make money. And so he was arguing that. It's kind of funny. He said, if I was a Stanford MBA, if I was talking to a Stanford MBA, I'd say, don't get out of Stanford and go work for $150,000 at a nonprofit. Go work and make $500,000 at a company, and write a $150,000 check every year, or $100,000 check every year to your favorite nonprofit, and you will do more good for the community than taking that pay cut. And that was his big thing. And I just thought it was great. So if you guys get a chance to see the Dan Pallotta TED Talk, it's 18 minutes, and it's a really good thing to watch.
Craig B. Thompson, President and CEO of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, $6.7 million.
Well, there you go. So maybe there's hope for now.
Again, you can't, the old version is that these people are toiling away,
Yeah.
doing it for the pure love of it. It's not that way anymore. Even in some of the every year, even in San Diego, they print some of the salaries of the top organizations. There's several nonprofits here where the executives.
Yeah,
pay
especially
very, very well.
especially in healthcare. The nonprofit, a lot of nonprofit healthcare organizations. And you want to run a world-class health organization, you need to pay someone who, so, there are arguments on both sides, but I tend to think that, if you really care about solving these social problems, you want good people to come out of these schools and want to work in the sector, which is why you should start for-profit businesses as social enterprises. That's the answer.
How do they get in touch with you?
So that's a good question. You can email me if you want, Ken D @missionedge.org. I'm sorry? My name is Ken, K-E-N, Davenport, D-A-V-E-N-P-O, D-A-V-E-N, P as in Paul, O-R-T. Davenport, yeah.
What kind of name is this? Italian?
No, English, actually. English on my father's side.
Can you repeat your email? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, Ken D, K-E-N-D, @missionedge.org. Yeah.
Where is your office?
Our office is in Liberty Station.
You drove from here to here?
Yeah. Just for Greg, though.
Some kind of cookies?
No, yeah, and no cookie either. I don't know.
Gwen, did you bring any cookies?
It's all right. I do it because I love seeing you guys here thinking about all this stuff. So, and
It's propagating movement. When you think about these
Yeah.
movements in general, they're waves that happen, and it starts with people having a thought or it's a collective consciousness, but then it has to be shared, and then it has to be discussed. And then you try to create opportunities for people to practice and experiment, and all of these things we want you to be able to do.
So let me throw out one more thing. We have our accelerator has its final pitch event on June 12th, and you guys, it's free to the public, and you guys are welcome to come if you want. It's at the Honor Foundation offices. It's one of our clients.
Where is that?
It's in Sorrento Valley, right off of the 5 off Sorrento Valley Road. And I don't have that address either. But if you look up the Honor Foundation, you'll find their address, or you can go on our website and you'll find the invite. And it's from 4 to 6, I think, on the 12th, and it'll be a fast pitch thing with nonprofits pitching their business idea, and it should be fun, and you'll meet a lot of people.
And if you're lucky, you may have cookies.
Yeah. Oh, and Kitchens for Good is catering it, so you'll get to see Kitchens for Good food as well.
Only people participating, or if just people want to be a sponge and hear?
Oh yeah, no, you should come. Yeah, come and be a sponge.
What is it called?
Missionedge.org.
No.
Oh, the Honor Foundation. That one. It's called the Honor Foundation. Yeah. Well, they're a great organization.
HONOR.
Yep.
Foundation.
And that is honor.org. It's a great
They provide
URL.
training and support for veterans and other military personnel, particularly those trained.
Yeah, it's a great organization. They're one of our clients also. And they have a brand new office that's fantastic. It's amazing. It's totally high-tech kind of place.
On that
I'm sorry?
Warrior Foundation, W-A-R-R.
Oh, the Warrior Foundation.
You don't know?
No, I don't know.
My goodness, that's year after year, month after month. It's on 760 KFMD
Ah.
from the injured military. And they came to San Diego, used this foundation to get the 501c funding.
Mm.
They ask people every day, day and night,
Uh-huh.
on 760, I'm sick and tired. They ask you to donate, but no use to call, so they give you a tax receipt.
Ah.
You can be that.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
And they take you a car, Toyota will come to tow you a car and sell them and the money give to them. You know, I consider this organization too much.
Too much?
Because
Because they tow your car.
because usually it's online, it's for military. And what's the difference between this one and that?
Yeah. Well, you know, the thing is that,
You say you don't know.
yeah, I mean, it's you know, I have sympathy for those who are are advertising a lot and trying to make money, because it's just a hard road to hoe, especially when there's so many veteran service organizations, a lot of competition. It's just tough. So there's lots of them. You guys, any other comments, or we have more time, so
I guess I got a question. So what do you think the future looks like for revenue streams for social enterprises? Because I think, you know, I know a lot of it was like the revenue-based generation, monthly subscription stuff. That seems to be kind of tapped out now. Like, what do you kind of see as the next couple?
yeah. Well, I think it's a good question. I'll tell you, our experience with the accelerator we run is that it's a hard transition for nonprofits to make, to go from the charity model to the earned revenue model. It has to start small and has to build over time. I think in the best case scenario, it's never going to be maybe even a majority of their budget. But if it provides some consistent revenue year over year, then it's that much easier to raise the amount they need to raise. But we do see, you know, there's cultural challenges with getting nonprofits to think like businesses. And it's such a foreign language for a lot of them. Now, generationally, you know, as things change, as the younger people come in and they have a different mindset, I think it'll be easier to do. But you know, technology I think has been a boon in a lot of ways, but there's also so much of it out there now. There's also so much peer-to-peer fundraising, and you know, everything kind of becomes this kind of din where you can't really, you know, rise above it. So, you know, I think we see some interesting models with technology, workforce development models that help put people to work, that help to pay for that's a really good model. And there's a few others that I think are successful. But a lot of them are, you know, look, it's hard to start a for-profit business. So, you know, I think in some ways it would seem easier for a nonprofit to do because you already have an organization, you already have infrastructure, you've already got some people, you're not starting from scratch, you have some domain expertise, you have some programmatic expertise, but it's still hard for them because the idea of charging people for stuff is just sometimes a hard thing for them to get over. But I'm hopeful that every little thing will help move them forward. And so, like out of this accelerator, we don't have huge expectations that, you know, they're going to end up, you know, starting the next, you know, Tom Shoes out of this or whatever. But one of the things that's been good for them is using the lean canvas and just having a different conversation and using different terms helps them to think about their beneficiaries differently. Like even having them think about their beneficiaries as their customers is an interesting thing that most people wouldn't think would be important, but a lot of nonprofits think about their customers as their funders. So their customers are their funders, and the people who they're serving are over here. And they don't necessarily think about them as their customer, but when you're paying for something, suddenly they're your customer, and you end up listening a lot closer to what their needs are and whether they're really getting value out of what you're doing. So we have seen that as kind of an epiphany, that we had one organization that runs a food truck for the homeless, and they started out by giving it away for free, and they found that the homeless didn't want it for free. They actually wanted to pay. And then as soon as they started charging, they were so opinionated. They were like, they had all sorts of opinions about the food, about the menu, and they were like, I'm putting my money down, I want it this way. You know, and they were like, oh my God, we never heard any of that when we were giving it away. So it was like really an interesting experiment to how important it is that when people have a stake in the game, they tell you a lot more about what's really going on.
So, it looks like you were connected with somebody, people in development. Just look at your LinkedIn. And the reason why that's important is because I interface with some of these people, and there was a big concern about Danny Dawson, right? So that's somebody who was on your LinkedIn. The Association of Fundraising Professionals in San Diego was very much concerned. They wanted to hear from me on real estate. They wanted to understand how real estate things were going to impact these donations. And there were a lot of things that I entered into, Qualcomm and their matching of contributions. But this personal exemption, the tax structure, really is changing, like, hey, I don't need to make these donations. The write-offs. So what's interesting to me is that if you're a nonprofit, you're relying upon people's generosity, but they're really looking at their own bottom line. Then it's not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah, boy, that's a really fantastic point you brought up, and I'm not sure what the impact is going to be. There are studies that show that people actually don't give as much for that tax-deductible donation as they give because they love they love the cause or they love the organization. I'm not sure I believe that necessarily. I think it's going to be interesting to see. So what we're talking about here is, in the tax law that just passed, the personal exemption went from, I guess for a couple, it went from 12 to 24,000, and for an individual, it went from 6 to 12. I think, is that? Yeah, something like that. So what that means is basically, and maybe not all of you guys were itemizing, but if you wrote a $2,500 check to charity, you'd get a $2,500 deduction off of your income, so you'd save money on taxes. But now the theory is that the personal exemption is so high that you won't itemize. You'll just say, oh, I'm going to take the $12,000 individual deduction and not itemize anything, including your mortgage and all that other stuff that you spend time doing. Although I guess there is a carve-out for mortgage in California, and so I don't know. But anyway, the idea that it's going to have a stilling effect on people writing checks to charity. And it may, and actually, again, this is a thing where I shouldn't, the recording's on, so I probably shouldn't say this, but here we go. There may be a beneficial component to that, in that it will create more of a market competition for a dollar that will become scarcer. And like any market, will allow those who really do good work to rise to the top. One of the challenges in the sector here is there are 10,000 nonprofits, registered nonprofits in San Diego. Most of them are not really active, but the ones that are active all are competing for relatively the same pot of dollars. And so you have this dilution effect that we're all scrambling around trying to get enough money together just to keep the lights on, when we can't build scale because it takes more money to really solve problems. It takes more money than we can reasonably raise because the pot is finite, and it feels like it's finite, it's only so big. So it may be that those casual donors go away, and suddenly now you're thinking about, are we going to have the best organizations survive, and those are going to have more, there'll be more consolidation, and you'll get some scale to start solving some of these problems. I don't know. I mean, I know our clients, they're scared and it's going to cause some pain, I think, for some of them, and therefore it's going to cause pain for me. So I know that I'm probably arguing against my self-interest right now, but I just see so much inefficiency in the market that I feel like it may end up being a healthier nonprofit sector at the end than it is today. That's just my thought.
I agree. So we're seeing a few trends with that. One is to the, because you mentioned you can have donor fatigue, that particularly even in a small community like San Diego where people keep going back to the same donors over and over again.
Same ones.
You begin getting that fatigue. And you always have to up your game because every time you come back to them, you have to demonstrate even greater value to them because they become desensitized a lot of times. But also the note, particularly with millennials and in the innovation sectors, we see this cycle of venture philanthropy, where people who have had success saying, it's not enough for me just to give you charitable dollars. I want to see how you're going to create impact with this. So every dollar I give you, I want you to amplify that with $2 of additional impact. Things like match funding and challenge grants, things like that, that will spur people to take on shared risk so that you kind of create more momentum. Plus, then demonstrate back to me how you took my dollar and actually created impact with it rather than just spend it.
See, if that happens, that's a much more productive funding relationship than the one that says, write me a $25,000 check out of your donor advised fund at the San Diego Foundation, and you'll feel good about yourself, and I'll be able to spend that money on my program.
$12 million you can get the new restaurant, which is at the northern point of SIO, named after you.
Really?
So,
Only 12 million?
12 million.
Wow.
But it's also interesting to see what people care about. So of course you can have older, wealthier donors that have made their money in more traditional ways that are happy to build a building or have a plaque. But a lot of the new wealth that's being created doesn't want that. They want to see something meaningful happen in the world, not a static building.
Right, so they're giving as an investment. And I actually, in my talks with potential donors and people that I talk to about some of our programs, I talk about it as an investment. And I actually talk about it as them buying shares in Mission Edge. I mean, I use that language because it makes sense to the people I'm talking to. It makes sense to me. When I first started Mission Edge, I was going out trying to raise charitable dollars. I was uncomfortable with the discussion, because if I was on the other end, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't give myself money. That's a really bad place to be. I would not invest in myself. Of course, my wife says I've done a lot of investing in myself in this organization in the last 5 years, but that's true. But like the pitch just it didn't resonate with me. I realized that I'm one of them. I'm like, I don't want to write a tax deductible donation. That does not move me. It just doesn't do anything for me. I want to see how, if I give you money, how are you going to scale what you're doing? And that's such a powerful conversation, and it's what we need to have more of.
So scaling impact and offering sustainability. From the day you started, how is this thing going to sustain itself? You may be able to use this kind of donor money to catalyze.
Yes.
But at some point, you're going to want to find a way to sustain it.
Yeah. So donor money is great seed money, but it's not a strategy for long-term viability.
So we're part of EW Scripps Association, and actually I sit on the steering committee. And one of the things is taking seed money, essentially it's like angel investors for researchers, and then, okay, show me what you can do, and then once they demonstrate, proof of concept or whatever, then they can go for the big dollars, to grant writing and things like that. And I actually feel really good about that, because that bootstrapping portion is sometimes the most difficult.
It is, and that also, in my experience, is unusual in the nonprofit sector. You don't get a lot of innovation funding and seed funding. Donors don't want to give you money to see if you'll fail, right? That's not the mentality. They'd rather give the money to, the Boys and Girls Clubs or, the United Way or something that's been around for 100 years because, it's predictable, right? So when I talked to the CEO of the San Diego Foundation, where they've got $600 million in donor advised funds, they've got $600 million in money sitting over there. She says that 80% of the donors write one check a year to the same nonprofit every year. That's what they do. And so she's looking at it generationally, saying, you know, that's a different generation than you guys. How am I going to get you guys to think about putting money in the San Diego Foundation? I said to her, well, good luck on that. But her thought is social enterprise and this investment mentality and this idea that we're going to be creating more and more growth and opportunity is something that will resonate with people, because that older generation of writing one check a year, that's not the future.
Well, shifted because the one vendor that they purchased from had 4 stars, and the new one has 5 stars, so you click on that one.
Right.
And it's quick, that fast that we change. I mean, look, there's people nodding their head.
Yeah.
I do it too.
Yeah.
Purchase on Amazon.
Yeah.
Look at reviews.
I know. It's crazy. It's interesting. But the world's changing. And so you guys are, and as Greg said, it is a movement, and I think you guys are at the front edge of it, and it's exciting. I think it's the one thing that really I look at and say the world's going to look different in 10 years in this way, is that we're going to have more innovation and more energy coming into the sector, saying, you know, why don't we have, Amazon's good. I have a friend of mine who works at Amazon, and he was like, Amazon just passed this, Seattle passed this head tax thing where they're charging companies in Seattle, I can't remember what it was, $500, $250, I don't know, some amount of money per employee, and Amazon's got like tens of thousands of employees, right? And so he was saying, you know, and they're doing that in order to solve the homeless problem. And so he said, why didn't the city council just ask Amazon to solve the homeless problem? Why don't they just do that? He was like, Amazon probably solved the homeless problem, right? And just like Amazon said, we're going into healthcare. Like, I was so happy to hear that. Let's have Amazon go into healthcare. Because we've been doing it the way we've been doing it, it hasn't been working. Innovation is required, and how do you get innovation? You need somebody like an Amazon to say, we know how to solve these big problems. So I don't know, it's just a different way of looking at it.
It's like in one big server.
Yeah, it's interesting. Anything else, you guys? No? Well, you've been a great audience. I appreciate your time.